Every day, the environment is becoming a more important issue for all of us. But for the men and women you're about to meet, and thousands like them, the environment is not only an issue, it's their profession.
When the company approached me about coming to work for them, to head up environmental programs, I had some misgivings because, again, I'd been a conservationist all my life.
They are environmentalists who work for industry, and for the most part, their efforts have received little notice outside their own profession.
There was a time when I had gotten very tired of getting up in the middle of the night to come out here when nobody else could possibly care what was going on. And it seems that
But they have made a difference, often a significant difference. And their role in the struggle to protect the environment is becoming more important.
Nobody even knew what ecology meant 20 years ago, by and large. So I think if you look at the changes that have taken place since 1970 to 1990, it's been pretty radical. We expect a lot of things.
Their research and expertise are helping business find successful solutions to environmental problems. And as their influence within industry grows, they are in a unique position to help corporations understand that the business of America can be conducted without the environment being the loser.
Give me some percent cover on this algae.
Percent cover? Okay, I'll take care of the algae then. You want to do that?
Sally Krenn, John Warwick, and Dave Somerville are environmentalists who work for Pacific Gas and Electric at the Diablo Canyon Nuclear Power Plant in California. It's their job to figure out the impact the plant has on the coastal environment.
The predatory snails, there's Oceanibra, there's Nucella.
But to measure change, you have to know the starting point. So their work requires a good deal of direct observation of plant and animal life. They have to come down to the beach and count the crabs.
So how many years of experience altogether do you three have on this beach?
45 to 50 years maybe total, end to end. So a half century of experience out here. I guess we've seen a lot of things come and go.
Oh, do you feel like you know everything there is to know about this place?
No, not at all.
It's constantly changing.
It's like any other kind of a biological problem that's, you can study one variable, but there's always about 30,000 other variables you can't account for, so the great unknown.
The environmental research at Diablo Canyon has been going on for 25 years. Currently, it involves the efforts of more than 24 scientists. This morning, several of those scientists are collecting samples of plankton, the tiny organisms that are the basis of the food chain. Barbara Russell, a consulting marine biologist, is in charge of the project.
we're out here conducting plankton tows on a weekly basis now in the morning, just after sunrise, to see what kind of plankton is in the water. And this is about the time of year when we expect to see the most larval fish, and that's specifically what we're looking for. Plankton by nature is very patchy, and it's difficult to see long-term trends unless you're out there doing monitoring on a regular basis. There was a time when I had gotten very tired of getting up in the middle of the night to come out here when nobody else could possibly care what was going on. And it seems that biological monitoring, much of it needs to be done in the evening hours, that everyone should be home in bed sleeping. The real beauty and what I found as the challenge in all of that is that we were able to then take those results from those studies and actually try to figure out what that meant in terms of an impact to the environment.
The research effort at Diablo covers a broad range of plant and animal life. Somewhat higher on the food chain than plankton are these elephant seal pups that live near the plant. Megan McNatt, an undergraduate student in biology at nearby Cal Poly State University, has been hired to study them. Megan is one of several students who augment the regular research staff.
Well, what we have here are elephant seals, and they're distinguished from harbor seals, which tend to be smaller and have a more spotted appearance. Seals, as opposed to sea lions have ears, and seals don't, visible ears.
So a lot of the work that we do it has a continuity to it that work that's done through universities doesn't have. We've got an environmental database here that goes back to 1966. We've got continuous data on the same intertidal stations that goes back over 25 years in some cases, and you just never have that opportunity in universities and all because it's difficult to get funding for that kind of thing.
The scientific research effort at Diablo Canyon is one of the longest, most comprehensive studies of any coastal region. But even after 25 years of intensive fieldwork and in studies using one of the most sophisticated wet labs in the world, Dave Somerville and his colleagues have only scratched the surface.
Funny thing about biological type studies, it's really difficult to pin something down, and you get into the environment, you've got the interaction of, like just in the marine intertidal, you might have the interaction of 40 or 50 really important species overlain with physical changes in the environment, temperatures that come and go and tides that come and go and you name it. So we're trying to make predictions and measurements and in the environmental sphere like that are really difficult.
Most of the research effort by the environmental staff at Diablo Canyon is designed to measure the impact of the plant's cooling water discharge. Ocean water is drawn in through large tunnels, used to cool the steam that runs the generator turbines, and is then released at a temperature about 20 degrees warmer than the surrounding ocean. This is one of the 2 tunnels through which water is drawn for cooling. It's dry now while one of the generating units is shut down, and it's been cleaned. But a week ago, just after shutdown, it looked like this. These barnacles and mussels that grow on the walls can break off and clog critical parts of the cooling system. This is known as biofouling. The standard procedure for control called for shutdowns 12 times a year to flush the tunnels with hot water, a process that reduces the plant's productivity. Because of his expertise in invertebrate biology, Dave Somerville was asked to look at the problem.
10 years ago, if anybody had told me I'd be doing this, I'd have been really surprised. But I began working in the marine intertidal on snails and abalone and that kind of thing. And anti-fouling work was something that we started doing about 8 or 9 years ago, and we really thought at the time it would be about a 2-year project that would develop a report and a technology and basically turn the thing in, and then we'd go on to something else. Most power plants don't have resident biologists that work on fouling problems. They generally handle this as an operations and maintenance problem.
Dave theorized that the heat treatment would be most effective if timed to coincide with the spawning cycle of the organisms. In order to confirm his idea, a tunnel model was built and seawater from the cooling system pumped through it. Over many months, Dave observed the life cycle of the organisms that grew on these test plates. By charting their growth and reproduction in the tunnel environment, he was able to recommend that the organisms could be controlled with only 2 properly timed shutdowns per year instead of 12. The difference represented millions of dollars in electricity generated by the plant.
I enjoy solving problems, mathematical problems, biological problems, just in general. And to be able to take biological knowledge and apply it to making things work better or work more efficiently or save money for the ratepayer, it's a really rewarding kind of a thing. So I don't think a day goes by that I ever dread coming to work here.
We really aren't exactly sure how many manatees there are in Florida. We do know that this is a year-round population. In the summertime, some of our animals may go as far north as the Outer Banks in the Carolinas, but for the most part, the animals stay in Florida, except a couple of months in the summer.
Pete Quincy is an environmentalist who lives and works in South Florida. Unlike many in his profession, he's not a specialist, he's a generalist. He holds degrees in marine biology, geology, and Florida history, and his job for Florida Power and Light is to apply his broad range of knowledge to everyday environmental problems.
Look at the vultures over here behind you, drying their wings in the sunlight. Got nice white ibis, little blue herons over here on this exposed mud flat. Oh, neat. Oh, there's 3 of them now. Look at that. Ah, a breaching porpoise. Those trees standing up on the prop roots like that are the red mangroves. These are probably the most sacred tree of Florida. Without those, we wouldn't have the rich estuary here that we do have.
Pete's professional concerns range from manatees to mangroves, from sea turtles to eagles. And much of his work takes place here, along the intracoastal waterway where the pressures of Florida's growing population are most acute.
See, now this guy, he has not slowed down in a slow speed zone, nor has the guy behind in the dark blue hull. Complete, utter disregard of the waterway rules here. Florida's population is growing at probably 700, 800 people a day, and all of those people want to live near the water. My role at FP&L has been not only to work with the company to develop an environmentally sensitive manner of providing electrical service to people in these situations, but also to advise and help the public in dealing with this. I have been an appointee to the Governor's Citizens Coastal Advisory Council. Former Governor Graham appointed me to that because he knew of my coastal background. So those kinds of things are all part of the job that I do for Florida Power and Light.
I'd like to introduce Pete Quincy from our Environmental Affairs Department. He's going to be giving a lecture and some information on endangered species, particularly birds. Pete?
Thanks, Bob. We've had several near misses with crews getting into trouble because of nests that they've placed.
Among Pete's many responsibilities, one of the most important is communication. He's often called on to share his knowledge with others. Today, he's conducting a training session for power company linemen at Lake Okeechobee.
Ospreys build the same nest and keep adding to it year in and year out. That's why they get so much garbage in there. We found a bicycle chain, motorcycle chain, about 40 feet of fishing leader has been found, a 2.5-pound chunk of lime rock.
Because he's a fellow employee, Pete is seen as an insider by the linemen. His understanding and respect for what they do is a key to getting his ideas across.
And this year, that nest is occupied by great horned owls. And the eagles are back on our structure with 3 eggs as of last Monday.
We can take it down after they're finished with it?
We can take down the osprey nest. You cannot touch an eagle's nest. That's an endangered species. They make a distinction there.
As long as it's not in use, we can take it down.
Yes, with notification. This is the normal kind of group of guys that we usually have on these things. They have done a lot of the stuff without ever environmental affairs talking to them. You heard one crew say that they had already changed out a woodpecker pole and left it intact with the nest there. And I've never been out here talking to these guys. They did that on their own. So while they weren't aware of perhaps the legal implications, they are sensitive to the needs of wildlife to some degree.
Pete's modesty is characteristic of many in his profession, but the fact is his efforts on behalf of Florida's wildlife have been significant. In his professional life, he's ranged from teaching high school biology to being a staff scientist for the Florida Audubon Society. As an environmentalist for Florida Power and Light, he draws on all his experience, one day working in the field with wildlife, the next helping to draft legislation in the state capitol. An issue that calls upon Pete's broad range of abilities is the effort to protect one of Florida's most endangered species, the manatee. Because manatees like warm water, they are often attracted to the warm outflows of power plants during cold spells. But the coastal waterways where manatees live and travel have some of the heaviest boat traffic in the world, and when they can't get out of the way, they suffer. In almost any group of manatees, there are sure to be some with propeller scars. In a typical year, dozens die from boat collisions. As a power company environmentalist, Pete has become deeply involved in efforts to protect the manatee. This power plant's design was modified to accommodate the manatee's habits.
Because we didn't want to place the manatees offshore where there is more boating activity, and the manatees were used to this shallow area behind me, we built a siphon feature so that the discharge from the newer units 3 and 4 could be emptied, or at least partially emptied, into this little embayment here, giving the animals a sanctuary. I think my role with FPL has enabled me to do things that I would not have been able to do as a citizen on the street, simply because I have had a large major corporation behind me, helping me do the things and teach FPL how to do things with as much sensitivity as possible.
Oh, look.
That is really nice.
That is nice.
Yeah, it's been underneath the red mangroves. Great.
There's a snail.
For Pete and his wife Debbie, a naturalist who works at a wildlife refuge, the Florida environment is both vocation and avocation. Their work, their volunteer activities, their recreation, all are a seamless effort to protect the Florida they love.
I think of myself as someone working behind the scenes to solve some of the small problems that are within the realm of solution. I can't do anything about acid rain, for instance, as an individual, but I can sure help on the migratory bird problem on FPL facilities. I can't do anything about the overall status of an endangered species, but I can help a few individuals of that, perhaps. Hopefully, I'm doing some good work. Hopefully, part of the public awareness is working, it's rubbing off. I may never be around to see the end of that, I don't know. I'm just here plugging along.
The provision says that the electric utility industry will be excluded pending the results of a 3-year study. On the Senate side, it lumps everybody in there. I mean, it just says everybody's got to comply.
This is Dick White, and this is his office on the 20th floor of a Dallas skyscraper. Not a habitat most people would associate with a working environmentalist. But Dick is a different breed of environmentalist. To be honest, he's a rare phenomenon in industry, but one that's becoming more common. Dick is a policy setter, a visionary, the environmental conscience of his company. He heads a professional staff of over 120 people, and the walls of his office are covered with awards. His career is an environmental success story. But 20 years ago, he wasn't even sure he wanted to work for industry.
When the company approached me about coming to work for them, to head up environmental programs in the Environmental Research Center, I had some misgivings because, again, I'd been a conservationist all my life. I was not familiar with big companies, industries, and how they worked and how they operated. The only experience I'd had with many industries and many companies, I was responsible for filing water pollution cases as part of my function when I was with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. So I probably had less than an objective view of industry. And I did have some concerns, quite frankly.
The first challenge Dick faced in his new career was here on the grasslands of eastern Texas, near the town of Fairfield in Freestone County. Texas Utilities was going to strip mine for lignite, a low-grade form of coal to be used in their new power plants. The mines would be among the largest in the world, each year moving nearly enough earth to dig the Panama Canal. It was going to be Dick's job to turn this scarred landscape into one suited for both cattle and wildlife.
When we first started the operation, I guess we were all a little bit awestruck by the magnitude of it, even ourselves within the company, because even though we were only taking dirt, essentially 120 foot of dirt here and moving it over here, we were actually restructuring the ground, or the earth, if you will, and recreating it. And that's a pretty awesome task to impose on someone.
If Dick White had misgivings, he was not alone. This is Texas cattle country, and feelings about the land run deep.
Oh! Come on, baby! Oh!
Many families in this area have been here for generations. Sewell Hill, for instance, is a local rancher whose family has lived here since 1825.
Well, when Texas Utilities first came in here, we thought, well, how are they going to mine this? Is it going to be strip mine or shaft mine? And they said strip mine. And surely we've seen the mining back over toward Marshall, Texas, up in Oklahoma, and driven by it and so on. And we knew what the end results could be, but they had it down in black and white that they were going to restore this land and make it productive again. So we accepted their word on it.
What if they hadn't delivered?
Well, I imagine they'd been confronted with numerous lawsuits. That's usually the way you settle things. You don't settle them in Texas with pistols anymore. At least we don't in Fairfield.
The pressure on Dick to succeed was enormous, but little was known about reclaiming strip mine land in Texas. Dick understood that if his company's programs were to be successful, an extensive research effort was needed.
We wanted to find out what effect we had on the environment through our operations. I didn't want to hear about what happened in Appalachia. Don't tell me what happened there. We want to know what our effect is going to be here so that we can plan the corrective measures, so we could minimize our disturbances, so that we could come up with a program and a plan that would protect the environment or restore the environment.
One of Dick's first research priorities was the soil itself. Though feelings for the land run deep in this part of Texas, it turned out that the topsoil didn't.
This soil is dominantly a fine sandy loam, about 10 inches deep, over a heavy red clay. Moisture does not move.
Eddie Bearden, a soil scientist at Texas Utilities.
This clay is heavy enough, and because of the soil structure, moisture cannot penetrate it very well. Neither can the plant roots. Therefore, this right here is about all that the plants can use as far as getting water and nutrients from.
The way the mining regulations initially came out, you would be required in many instances to store these just in these same soil horizons and then put them back just the way they were. And what you were going to end up with was really a very poor media for revegetation processes.
After Dick and the researchers began studying the soil overlaying the mine area, they questioned whether returning it to its original state, layer by layer, was a good idea. Their research led to a new way of handling the land reclamation. Instead of keeping the layers separate, they were mixed. The result was a soil profile very different from the unmined land.
If you remember on the unmined material, the roots and the rainfall, the moisture could only penetrate to about 8 to 10 inches depth before they were restricted by the clay. In this soil, however, due to the mixing process, the moisture and the roots can go all the way down the entire face, and you can see the roots as we go down the pit face here, even down here to the very bottom.
In the past 20 years, a lot has been learned, but research efforts to improve the environment around the mine and power plant have never stopped. Today, researchers are studying topics as diverse as the feeding habits of fish, the use of different plant species as food for cattle and wildlife, and the absorption of trace elements by plants. More than 70 major research projects have been conducted over the years in cooperation with Texas universities. Brian Gorsera is a graduate student at Texas A&M. He is studying the distribution of deer on mined and unmined land.
It's important as a way of evaluating the reclamation efforts. There's not much known about how they migrate onto these type of areas. I'm just starting my research, and I had no idea what it would be like, but I had images of just flat, desolate, moon-like landscapes, and that's very much what I've not seen here.
From moonscape to productive land was a process of natural resource management, applying the knowledge gained from research to land reclamation. But Dick soon learned that it took more than applying research to make the process a success.
We ran into a little bit of a hitch early on because I made the decision to plant all this beautiful wildlife habitat all over the countryside, along fence lines, in the, by the roadsides, by the gates, and so on. And all this was doing was getting in the way of the farmer's operation. He doesn't want these plants all around his fence lines. They're a maintenance problem. They tear down his fence. And as I visited with some of the landowners and all in town, they were saying, say, Dick, you're planting all these things in the wrong places. You know, they're going to get in the way of our cattle. And yet I was getting information perhaps from some of my learned friends on the other side of the picture at the universities or environmental groups that wanted all of this in forests. So you had to come up with a mix or a trade-off, as all environmental matters are, a compromise. Where do you want to be? And that was to compromise the pure research that we had learned with the practical aspects of running a cattle operation so a man can make a living and feed his family. And that was a lesson that Dick White learned early on, that you've got to learn to meld and mix the two. You can't take one and strictly apply it to the other.
The research, the work, and the hard lessons learned along the way have paid off. And while the awards in Dick's office testify to the successes, perhaps the most satisfying grade has come from the people who know the land best.
There's a number of people out there on the restored area now that the land is much more productive for them than it was prior to being mined. A lot of times I ride by out there and look and thank God what beautiful cow country that it's just fantastic. I wished I had some of it.
The success of our environmental programs, I think, hinges on the one theme that I guess I've been preaching since the day I got here, and that's commitment. To have a top-notch environmental program, you've got to have that commitment from the corporation, from the board of directors, all the way down to the guy driving the dozer. But the company has to make that decision that yes, we're going to do it, and we're going to do it right. And that's why I'm here. I'm with a company that wants to do it right.